A new challenge. The gymnasium aboard the massive intergalactic station, known as Starpoint, was bustling with a mixture of alien races and a few humans scattered among them. Here, species from all corners of the galaxy came to train, enhance their physical strength, and share techniques from their homeworlds. At the center of the commotion was a human named Jake Mason, a renowned fitness trainer, known for his ability to adapt Earth's training methods to fit any species' physiology. Jake, in his mid-30s, stood out among the gym-goers, not just because he was one of the few humans aboard, but because of his imposing build and approachable demeanor. He had helped train hundreds of clients, each with unique physical structures, from creatures with multiple limbs to beings with gravity-altered musculature. But today, he encountered something new. Across the gym, he noticed a figure struggling with a set of resistance coils designed for multi-limbed species. Her body was sleek and humanoid, with violet skin that shimmered under the artificial lights. Her hair, a cascade of silver blue, framed her striking features. Despite her beauty, it was clear she was frustrated. Every attempt she made with the equipment seemed awkward, her balance off. Jake decided to help. As he approached, she looked up, her large, violet eyes locking onto his. There was a fire behind them, a mix of determination and embarrassment. "Need a hand?" Jake asked, offering a smile. The alien woman hesitated before nodding. "I'm Taraketh, from the planet Vixar," she said in a voice that had a strange melodic quality. "This equipment, it's not made for someone like me." Jake chuckled softly. "I get that a lot. Let me show you a few adjustments." He stepped forward, his hands moving with expert precision as he adjusted the resistance bands. Taraketh watched intently as Jake demonstrated the correct posture, carefully adapting Earth-based techniques for her physiology. As she mimicked his movements, there was a noticeable improvement. "You're picking it up quickly," Jake said, impressed. "You have great potential." Taraketh smirked, a teasing glint in her eyes. "Flattery, human, or are you trying to make your job easier?" Jake grinned. "Maybe both." The training session continued, and as they worked through various exercises, Jake learned more about Taraketh. She was a warrior from her world, trained in combat, but inexperienced with human-style conditioning. On Vixar, warriors honed their bodies through battle and training under the planet's unique gravity. But here, on Starpoint, the training was different, more refined, and Taraketh was determined to master it. As they wrapped up the session, Taraketh wiped the sweat from her brow, her muscles aching but satisfied. "This was more effective than I expected. I could use more of this. Training." Jake raised an eyebrow. "You're welcome to join my regular sessions." She paused, her expression shifting slightly. "Actually, I was hoping for something more private." Jake blinked, caught off guard. "Private?" Taraketh nodded, her gaze unwavering. "I have my own training space in my quarters. The equipment there is more suited for my physiology. I need someone who can push me, help me reach my full potential. Would you consider it?" Jake hesitated, knowing the station's rules about personal relationships between trainers and clients. But the opportunity to work with someone so unique, to push his own boundaries as a trainer, was tempting. "I'll think about it," he said, his voice measured. Taraketh smiled, a hint of something playful in her eyes. "Don't take too long, human. I might find someone else." As she walked away, Jake couldn't shake the feeling that this was the beginning of something far more complex than just a training session. The invitation accepted. Jake Mason found himself pacing the small, sterile confines of his quarters aboard Starpoint. The invitation from Taraketh lingered in his mind like a challenge that dared him to break the rules, both professional and personal. Starpoint's regulations were clear. Personal relationships between trainers and clients were discouraged, if not outright forbidden, especially when they came from such vastly different species. But there was something about Taraketh that made him want to bend the rules, something that sparked a curiosity he hadn't felt in a long time. The beep of his comm device snapped him out of his thoughts. It was a message, and sure enough, it was from Taraketh. You've had enough time to think, human. Are you ready for the real challenge? Jake smirked at the directness of the message. There was no subtlety to Taraketh, no beating around the bush. Her straightforward nature was something he admired. With a sigh, he typed his response. I'll be there tomorrow, 1800 hours. The message sent, and Jake felt a strange sense of anticipation course through him. Tomorrow would be different. No more distractions from other clients, no interruptions. Just him, Taraketh, and whatever challenge she had in store. The next evening, Jake stood outside the door to Taraketh's quarters, a strange mix of excitement and tension bubbling under the surface. As the door slid open, the faint sound of rhythmic Vixar battle music echoed through the halls. The lights inside her quarters were dim, giving the space an almost ethereal glow. Unlike the more cramped crew quarters the human personnel were assigned, Taraketh's room was spacious and meticulously designed. Weapons of alien origin lined the walls, and in the center of the room stood a gym setup that would make even the most advanced human facilities look outdated. Welcome, human, came Taraketh's voice, smooth and confident. Jake stepped inside, taking in the sight of her. Taraketh was already stretching, her violet skin shimmering under the low light. Her physique was more defined than it had appeared at the gym, her muscles taut but not bulky, perfectly adapted for the gravity shifts her home planet demanded. She moved with a natural grace that hinted at her warrior training, though it was clear she was not fully accustomed to the kind of workouts Jake specialized in. You sure you're ready for this? Jake asked, crossing his arms with a playful smirk. Taraketh shot him a confident look, her lips curving into a small smile. I was born ready. The real question is, can you keep up? Jake chuckled and set his bag down. All right then, show me what you've got. For the first half of the session, Jake pushed Taraketh through a series of intense drills. Her personal gym allowed for more flexibility, and Jake was impressed with the range of equipment she had collected. The weight systems were far more advanced than what the station's gym had to offer, incorporating variable gravity simulations and adaptive resistance technology. Each exercise was a test of endurance, precision, and strength. Taraketh, to her credit, took to the challenge with incredible resolve. Even when the exercises became grueling, she pushed through, her eyes never leaving Jake's as if silently telling him she could handle whatever he threw at her. He adjusted her form with the same precision he had in their first session, though this time there was no gym audience to maintain any semblance of formality. Here, in the privacy of her quarters, the air was charged with an unspoken understanding. This wasn't just about fitness anymore. As the session continued, Jake noticed something different about Taraketh's movements. Each repetition, each stretch seemed to carry more weight than mere physical exertion. It was as if she were preparing for something beyond the usual demands of keeping her body in peak condition. Between sets, Taraketh finally broke the silence. You're wondering why I asked you to come here, she said, her voice steady as she wiped the sweat from her brow. Jake looked up from adjusting the equipment. It crossed my mind, yeah. You're capable of a lot more than you let on at the gym. Taraketh nodded, her expression growing serious. I didn't come to Starpoint just to train. There's a conflict brewing in the outer systems. My people, the Vixar, are preparing for war. The galaxy's shifting, and it's only a matter of time before the fighting reaches us. I need to be ready. The weight of her words hung heavy in the air. Jake had heard rumors of tensions building in the outer systems, skirmishes between various alien factions, but he hadn't realized how close to reality it was. He leaned against the wall, arms crossed, studying her. And you want me to help you prepare for that? Jake asked, keeping his tone neutral. Taraketh met his gaze with intensity. Your human techniques, the way you train, it's different from anything we've seen. You push the body in ways we don't. I need that. I need you to help me become stronger, faster. If I'm not ready, my people won't stand a chance. Jake took a deep breath. This wasn't just another workout session anymore. This was about survival, about preparing for a battle that could affect the balance of power in the galaxy. And now somehow he had become a part of it. "You realize this isn't just about fitness," Jake said carefully. "What you're asking for it could be dangerous. You're talking about war." Taraketh's eyes softened for a moment, the fire dimming slightly. "I know, but I don't have a choice. My people don't have a choice. You've seen what I'm capable of. Now I need to go beyond that, and I need you to push me there." Jake ran a hand through his short-cropped hair, exhaling slowly. This was new territory for him. He'd trained soldiers before, but never with stakes like these. This wasn't just about physical strength. It was about preparing someone for the brutal reality of combat. His mind raced with possibilities, methods he could use to push her to the limit. "All right," he finally said, his voice firm. "I'll help you. But we do this my way. No holding back. If you want to be ready, you need to be prepared for anything. And that means you'll be pushing yourself harder than ever before." Taraketh's lips curved into a determined smile. "I wouldn't expect anything less." As the session resumed, the air between them shifted. There was no more playful banter, no teasing comments. Every move, every instruction carried a new weight. Jake introduced Taraketh to human combat training techniques, incorporating high-intensity drills with tactical precision. They sparred, moving through a series of sequences designed to sharpen reflexes and increase endurance. Taraketh's body responded to the training with fierce determination, her muscles adapting to the new challenges Jake presented. But beneath the surface, Jake could see the toll it was taking. She was pushing herself harder than she ever had before, and while her resolve was strong, even the most skilled warriors had their limits. As they finished the final set, Taraketh collapsed onto the mat, her chest heaving as she caught her breath. Jake stood over her, his own body glistening with sweat, though his breathing was more controlled. "You're getting stronger," Jake said, offering her a hand to help her up. "But we've got a long way to go." Taraketh took his hand, pulling herself to her feet. Her violet eyes burned with renewed determination. "Then we keep going, tomorrow and the day after, until I'm ready." Jake nodded, feeling the gravity of her words. This wasn't just about training anymore. He had become part of something much larger, something that could change the fate of an entire species. As he left Taraketh's quarters that night, the weight of his new responsibility settled on his shoulders. Whatever came next, Jake knew one thing for sure: this was only the beginning. The path to perfection. The weeks that followed Jake Mason's agreement to train Taraketh were nothing short of grueling. For both of them, each session felt like a test of willpower, pushing the boundaries of physical endurance and mental strength. Taraketh was a warrior, no doubt, but human training methodologies were unlike anything she had ever encountered. She quickly learned that the road to perfection was paved with exhaustion, sweat, and more than a few bruises. A new level of intensity. In the dimly lit training room aboard Starpoint, the hum of the ship's engines provided a constant background noise, almost like a heartbeat. Today, Jake had something new in mind for Taraketh, a blend of combat simulation with strength training, specifically tailored for the unique physiology of the Vixar people. They weren't just training for a potential war, they were preparing her body to endure the impossible. "Ready?" Jake asked, stepping back as Taraketh adjusted the straps on her wrists. They were resistance bands, but unlike the gym's more mundane tools, these were augmented to simulate variable gravity, creating an ever-shifting challenge to her strength. Taraketh's violet skin glistened as she took a deep breath, eyes narrowing in focus. "Always." Jake hit a switch, and the entire environment shifted. Holographic enemies materialized, surrounding Taraketh as the gravity fluctuated between Earth's standard and the crushing force of her home planet. Each shift pushed her muscles to the brink, forcing her to adapt in real time. "Attack." Jake's voice cut through the tension. Taraketh launched herself at the nearest enemy, her body twisting with graceful precision as she landed a powerful blow. Her muscles strained as the gravity spiked mid-kick, but she didn't falter. The holographic opponent dissolved into light, and she quickly pivoted to the next one. Her movements were fluid yet sharp, a testament to the weeks of intense training she had endured. But the real challenge wasn't the enemies, it was the gravity. Each moment, her body was forced to adjust, her limbs growing heavier, her breath more labored. But Taraketh pushed on, sweat streaming down her face, determination written in every movement. Mental warfare. After a particularly grueling session, Taraketh collapsed onto the mat, her chest heaving as she tried to catch her breath. Jake, standing over her with his arms crossed, nodded in approval. "You're getting faster," he said, tossing her a towel. "But your mind is starting to slip when you get tired. You hesitate." Taraketh wiped the sweat from her brow, frustration flashing in her eyes. "I'm not used to this. Your training pushes me beyond what I thought possible, but the mental strain," she paused, her voice betraying her exhaustion. "It's harder than I expected." Jake crouched beside her, his tone serious but encouraging. "War isn't just physical, Taraketh. It's mental. The minute you lose focus, you lose everything. Strength means nothing if you can't think clearly under pressure." She stared at him for a moment, her violet eyes hardening as his words sank in. She knew he was right. Physical strength was something the Vixar prided themselves on, but they had never emphasized mental discipline the way humans did. This was a new kind of warfare, one she wasn't entirely prepared for. "What do you suggest?" she asked, her voice low. Jake smirked. "Meditation." Taraketh raised an eyebrow. "Meditation. You think sitting still will make me stronger?" Jake chuckled. "Not stronger. Smarter. More focused. You can train your body all you want, but if your mind's not sharp, you'll never reach your full potential. Meditation will help you control your thoughts, clear your mind, and focus under pressure." Taraketh sighed, but she nodded. "I'll try." The breakthrough. As the weeks went on, Taraketh took to the meditation exercises with surprising dedication. At first, she was skeptical, but soon she began to see the benefits. Her reaction times improved, her focus sharpened, and the hesitation Jake had noticed began to fade. Her mind was becoming as strong as her body, a dangerous combination that would make her an unstoppable force. But Jake wasn't letting up. With each passing day, the training grew more intense. He introduced new techniques, simulations of chaotic battlefields where Taraketh had to fight while dodging holographic explosions, adapting to sudden changes in gravity, and maintaining perfect form under pressure. Each challenge pushed her to her limits, but with every victory she grew stronger. It was during one particularly intense session that Taraketh had her breakthrough. They were in the middle of a combat drill, holographic enemies attacking from all sides, gravity shifting wildly. Taraketh moved with precision, taking down opponent after opponent, her muscles straining but never faltering. Suddenly, Jake hit a switch and the simulation escalated. The gravity spiked to 3 times its usual strength, and Taraketh faltered for a split second. One of the enemies got through her defenses, landing a blow that sent her sprawling to the ground. Jake didn't stop the simulation. "Get up," he barked, his voice sharp. Taraketh groaned, pushing herself up, her limbs feeling like lead. The enemies closed in, and for a moment, it seemed like she wouldn't be able to recover. But then something clicked. Her breathing steadied, her mind cleared, and she tapped into a well of strength she didn't know she had. With a roar, she surged to her feet, her body moving faster than before. She took down the enemies with ruthless efficiency, her mind completely focused. When the simulation finally ended, Jake stood back, watching her with a look of satisfaction. "Now you're ready." Taraketh, still catching her breath, looked up at him, a fierce smile on her face. She had done it. She had pushed herself beyond her limits, reached a new level of strength and focus. But more than that, she had learned to control her mind, to stay calm under pressure. She was becoming the warrior she needed to be. The bond strengthens. In the aftermath of the breakthrough, the dynamic between Jake and Taraketh began to shift. What had started as a professional relationship between trainer and client had evolved into something deeper. They spent more time together outside of training, discussing tactics, strategy, and the looming conflict in the outer systems. Taraketh confided in Jake about the growing unrest among her people, and Jake shared his own experiences from his time training soldiers on Earth. There was a mutual respect between them, a bond forged through hardship and shared goals. But there was also an unspoken tension, something that neither of them had addressed, but both could feel growing with each passing day. It was a tension born from the intensity of their training sessions, the trust they had built, and the undeniable attraction that simmered beneath the surface. One evening, after a particularly brutal session, Jake and Taraketh sat in her quarters, the silence between them comfortable but charged. "You've pushed me harder than anyone ever has," Taraketh said, her voice quiet but full of gratitude. "I owe you more than I can say." Jake shrugged, a small smile on his lips. "You did the work. I just showed you the way." For a moment, they sat in silence, the weight of everything they had been through hanging in the air. Taraketh turned to Jake, her violet eyes locking onto his. "There's something between us, Jake," she said softly. "Something more than just training." Jake met her gaze, the tension finally coming to a head. He had felt it too, but had kept it buried beneath the surface, unwilling to cross that line. "Taraketh," he began, his voice trailing off. Before he could say anything more, she leaned in, her lips brushing against his. It was a brief, tentative kiss, but it carried the weight of everything they had been through together. When they pulled back, both of them were breathing heavily, the air between them charged with electricity. But Taraketh wasn't one to dwell on emotion. She smiled, a glint of mischief in her eyes. "Tomorrow we train harder." Jake laughed, shaking his head. "Always pushing her." Always. Their bond, both as warriors and something more, was now cemented. But with the growing threat of war on the horizon, Jake knew their greatest challenges were still ahead, and whatever came next, they would face it together. The rising tensions. With Taraketh's training reaching new heights, the bond between her and Jake was undeniable. However, the looming conflict between the Vixer and the Terran Alliance began to cast a shadow over their progress. Both knew that war was coming, and their preparation had to be flawless. But even as they pushed their bodies and minds to the limits, something more significant was happening beyond the training rooms. Political tensions were rising, and the fragile peace that held the galaxy together seemed ready to fracture at any moment. Diplomatic fracture. In the heart of the Vixer Empire, news of Taraketh's intense training with a human was not received lightly. The Vixer High Council, a rigid and conservative body of elders, were deeply suspicious of the growing Terran influence. The Vixer were proud, with a long history of self-reliance and military dominance. Allowing a human to train one of their most promising warriors was seen by some as a betrayal of their traditions. As whispers of Taraketh's sessions with Jake spread, the council convened an emergency meeting. In a grand chamber adorned with tapestries depicting ancient Vixer conquests, the tension was palpable. Elder Naros, one of the most vocal traditionalists, was the first to speak. "Our people have stood unchallenged for centuries," Naros began, his deep voice echoing through the chamber. "Yet now, we allow an outsider, a human, to teach our warriors? This is unacceptable." There were murmurs of agreement from several other elders, but not all were on Naros' side. Elder Vethara, a younger but respected member of the council, stepped forward. "Taraketh is no ordinary warrior," she argued. "She seeks knowledge and strength from all sources. We cannot afford to be closed-minded in a time of great change. The humans' methods are different, yes, but they are effective. Taraketh has become stronger, both physically and mentally." Naros scoffed. "Stronger? Or weaker, relying on alien teachings instead of her own people? The human presence among us is a risk to our culture and our security. If Taraketh is allowed to continue, it will send the message that we, the Vixer, need human help." The debate raged for hours, with no clear resolution. But one thing was certain: the training sessions between Taraketh and Jake were becoming a symbol of a much larger ideological battle within the Vixar Empire. As the council remained divided, Taraketh's actions were being watched closely. Any misstep could result in her being labeled a traitor or worse. The unspoken strain. Back on Starpoint Station, Taraketh was oblivious to the full extent of the political storm brewing around her. However, she could sense the growing tension between the Vixar and humans. She noticed the subtle shifts in the way other Vixar warriors looked at her during her visits to the training grounds. Where once there had been admiration and respect, now there was suspicion and doubt. Jake, too, was feeling the weight of the situation. His relationship with Taraketh had grown beyond mere professional courtesy, and though they shared moments of closeness, there was always a sense of unspoken strain. He knew that their time together wasn't just about training anymore. It had become a symbol of the fragile alliance between their species. Every day, he wondered how much longer they could keep going before the outside world intruded on what they had built. After one particularly brutal session, Jake and Taraketh found themselves sitting in the observation deck of Starpoint, watching the stars drift by. The silence between them was comfortable, but Jake could feel that something was weighing on Taraketh's mind. "Something on your mind?" he asked, breaking the quiet. Taraketh sighed, her violet eyes gazing out into the endless expanse of space. "The council is growing uneasy. My people, they don't trust humans the way I do. They think I'm too close to you, that I'm abandoning our ways." Jake nodded, understanding the gravity of her words. "I figured as much. It's not just your people. The Terran Alliance isn't too thrilled about us working together either. There are some who think we're giving too much away, sharing our tactics with the Vixar." Taraketh turned to face him, her expression serious. "But this is the only way to truly prepare. You've pushed me harder than any Vixar could. Your methods are what will make the difference in the coming war." Jake reached out, placing a hand on her shoulder. "We're doing what we can, but we need to be ready for the fallout. If the Council or the Alliance decides to act against us, we'll need to move fast." Taraketh nodded, her gaze hardening. "Then we'll be ready." A test of loyalty. The true test of their loyalty to one another came sooner than either had expected. One evening, after an intense day of training, Taraketh received a message from the Vixar High Council. She was summoned back to her homeworld immediately. The tone of the message was formal, but there was an underlying tension that made it clear. This was not a request. Taraketh shared the news with Jake as they walked through the corridors of Starpoint. He sensed the urgency in her voice. "What do you think they want?" Jake asked, his brow furrowed in concern. "They want to know where my loyalty lies," Taraketh replied, "and they'll want to know why I've been spending so much time with you." Jake's jaw clenched. He knew this moment was inevitable, but it didn't make it any easier to hear. "And what are you going to tell them?" Taraketh stopped walking, turning to face him. "I'll tell them the truth, that you've made me stronger, that our training has given me the edge I need to protect my people." Jake nodded slowly, though he couldn't shake the feeling of dread in his gut. "You know, they might not see it that way. They might see me as a threat." Taraketh's eyes softened, and she stepped closer, her hand gently touching his arm. "I won't let them harm you, Jake. You've earned my trust, and I'll defend you if I have to." Jake's heart swelled with both pride and fear. "Just be careful. You don't have to fight this alone." Taraketh smiled, though there was a sadness in her eyes. "I know, but some battles can't be fought together." The Council's ultimatum. Taraketh's return to her homeworld was met with a cold reception. The Vixar High Council wasted no time in calling her before them. The grand chamber was filled with the imposing figures of the elders, their eyes fixed on her with a mixture of disappointment and suspicion. Elder Narrows, the most vocal critic of her training with Jake, stood at the forefront. His voice boomed through the chamber. "Taraketh, you have brought great concern to this council. You have chosen to train with a human, forsaking the ways of our people. Do you not see how this undermines our strength? Taraketh stood tall, her expression calm but resolute. I have not forsaken our ways, Elder Narrows. I have learned from them, as I always have. But the humans have knowledge that we can use. Their methods have made me stronger, more focused. I am still Vixer, and I will always fight for my people. Nora's eyes narrowed. Yet you spend your time with this human, this Jake Mason. Are you sure your loyalty remains with us? Taraketh's jaw tightened, but she kept her voice steady. My loyalty is to my people. Jake Mason has helped me become a better warrior, but that does not mean I've abandoned the Vixer. We need every advantage we can get if we are to survive what's coming. The room was silent for a moment as the elders exchanged glances. Finally, Elder Vethara, who had been Taraketh's ally in the past, spoke up. You say you've grown stronger. Prove it. The council will decide your fate based on your actions, not your words. Taraketh nodded, her heart pounding in her chest. What must I do? Narrows stepped forward, a cruel smile on his face. You will fight. Prove your strength in combat. If you fail, your allegiance to the humans will be your undoing. Taraketh's eyes flashed with defiance. I won't fail. The stage was set. Taraketh's fate, and possibly the future of the alliance between the Vixer and the Terran Alliance, hung in the balance. And as she prepared for the most important battle of her life, Jake's words echoed in her mind. You're not alone. The trial of strength. Taraketh stood at the center of the Vixer arena, the ancient battleground where warriors throughout the ages had proved their worth. The air was thick with tension as thousands of her people gathered to witness the trial. The arena itself was a massive stone structure, its walls lined with carvings depicting the great Vixer warriors who had triumphed before her. Today, it was her turn to prove her loyalty and strength, not just to her people, but to herself and to Jake. Far above the arena, in a raised balcony, the Vixer High Council sat in judgment. Elder Narrows, who had issued the challenge, watched her with piercing eyes. He believed this would be her downfall, but her time with a human trainer had weakened her, made her soft. Elder Vethara, who had spoken in her defense, sat beside him, her expression unreadable, but her gaze unwavering. This was Taraketh's moment, and no one, not even Jake, could fight this battle for her. The arena of Vixer. As Taraketh stood waiting for the trial to begin, she could feel the weight of generations of warriors upon her shoulders. Her ancestors had fought in this very arena, their victories immortalized in the carvings that lined the walls. She was not just fighting for herself today, but for her entire lineage, for the pride of her people. The Vixer arena was no ordinary battleground. It was a place of deadly challenges designed to test not only physical strength, but also strategy and resilience. Taraketh had trained for years within its confines, but today would be different. Today, she faced one of the Vixer's greatest warriors, Kresh, a hulking brute known for his brutality in combat. Kresh entered the arena with a roar, his massive frame casting a shadow over the ground. His dark scales gleamed in the sunlight, and his piercing yellow eyes locked onto Taraketh. He towered over her, his muscular body rippling with power. The crowd cheered his name, and Taraketh could feel the weight of their expectations. Kresh was a legend among the Vixer, undefeated in countless battles. But Taraketh wasn't afraid. She had faced fear before, and she had conquered it. Her time with Jake had taught her that strength was more than just physical power. It was about strategy, endurance, and adaptability. She could win this fight, but she would have to be smarter, faster, and more focused than ever before. The battle begins. A loud gong sounded, signaling the start of the trial. Kresh wasted no time, charging at Taraketh with a speed that belied his massive size. His first strike was a crushing blow aimed at her midsection, but Taraketh dodged nimbly to the side, her years of training with Jake kicking in. She could hear the crowd gasp as she narrowly avoided the hit. Kresh was relentless, swinging again and again with bone-crushing force. Each strike was powerful enough to shatter stone, and Taraketh knew that if she took even one direct hit, the fight would be over. But she didn't plan to let him touch her. Using her smaller size and agility to her advantage, she danced around him, avoiding his strikes and looking for an opening. Her patience paid off. After one particularly wild swing, Kresh left himself open, and Taraketh seized the opportunity. With a fluid motion, she delivered a series of precise strikes to his side, targeting his ribs. The crowd roared as Kresh staggered, but he quickly recovered, lashing out with a backhanded blow that Taraketh barely avoided. This was no ordinary fight. It was a test of endurance, of who could outlast the other. And as the minutes dragged on, it became clear that Kresh was growing frustrated. He had expected an easy victory, but Taraketh was proving to be a far more formidable opponent than he had anticipated. A lesson in strategy. Jake's teachings echoed in Taraketh's mind as the battle raged on. He had always emphasized the importance of outthinking her opponent, of using their strength against them. Kresh was strong, but he was predictable, relying on brute force to overwhelm his enemies. Taraketh, on the other hand, had learned to adapt, to think on her feet. She could see the frustration in Kresh's eyes as he missed yet another swing. His movements were becoming more erratic, less controlled. He was tiring, and that was exactly what Taraketh had been waiting for. With a sudden burst of speed, Taraketh closed the distance between them, launching a series of rapid strikes aimed at Kresh's legs. Her blows were precise, targeting the muscles and tendons that supported his massive frame. Kresh rolled in pain, staggering as his leg gave out beneath him. The crowd fell silent as Taraketh delivered the final blow, a powerful kick to Kresh's chest that sent him sprawling to the ground. For a moment, it seemed as though time had stopped. Kresh, the undefeated champion, lay defeated at her feet. The silence was broken by the sound of the gong, signaling the end of the trial. Taraketh stood tall, her chest heaving as she caught her breath. She had done it. She had won. The council's verdict. As Taraketh stood victorious in the arena, she could feel the eyes of the Vixa High Council upon her. Elder Neros looked furious, his face twisted in disbelief. Elder Vethara, however, allowed herself a small smile. The trial was over, and Taraketh had proven her strength, not just to the council, but to her entire people. Taraketh, Elder Vethara's voice rang out across the arena. You have shown great strength and skill today. You have proven that you are a true Vixa warrior, and that your training with the human has not weakened you, but made you stronger. The crowd erupted into cheers, but Taraketh barely heard them. Her focus was on Elder Naros, who stood, his expression dark and brooding. He would not be so easily convinced. This trial may be over, Naros said, his voice cold, but the true test lies ahead. War is coming, and you will be called to fight for your people. I hope your human methods will serve you well on the battlefield. Taraketh met his gaze, unflinching. I will fight with everything I have. For my people, and for the alliance between us and the humans. Naros said nothing more, turning on his heel and leaving the arena. But Taraketh knew that this was not the end. The war was coming, and the real battle had yet to begin. Reunion with Jake. After the trial, Taraketh returned to Starpoint Station, where Jake was waiting for her. The moment she saw him, she felt a weight lift from her shoulders. She had done what she needed to do, and now she could return to the one person who had helped her become the warrior she was today. Guess you survived, Jake said with a grin as she approached. Taraketh rolled her eyes but couldn't hide the smile that tugged at her lips. Barely. Kresh was a challenge, but in the end, it was your training that got me through it. Jake's expression softened, and he reached out to take her hand. You did this on your own, Taraketh. I just gave you the tools. You're the one who had the strength to use them. For a moment, they stood there in silence, the weight of everything they had been through together hanging in the air. Taraketh knew that this was only the beginning. The war was coming, and they would need each other more than ever in the days ahead. But for now, she allowed herself to enjoy this small victory, knowing that together they could face whatever challenges lay ahead. The shadow of war. Starpoint Station buzzed with an energy unlike anything Taraketh had ever felt before. The once peaceful corridors, filled with traders, diplomats, and travelers from across the galaxy, now pulsed with the anticipation of war. Soldiers in various uniforms marched through the halls, weapons clutched tightly, their faces hardened with grim determination. The Vixar and human alliance, once an unlikely and fragile union, was now bound by the shared threat of an impending conflict, an enemy neither of them could afford to ignore. Taraketh stood beside Jake in the station's observation deck, her gaze fixed on the vastness of space. The stars beyond seemed distant, cold, and indifferent to the looming danger that now shadowed her world. Reports of skirmishes along the borders had begun trickling in, rumors of an unknown alien species challenging the combined strength of their two races. It wasn't just a war for territory, it was a war for survival. "You ever seen anything like this?" Jake asked quietly, breaking the silence between them. Taraketh shook her head. "No, the Vixar have fought wars, but never against an enemy like this. These invaders, they don't fight for glory or honor. They destroy everything in their path." Jake crossed his arms, his brow furrowed in thought. Sounds like they've got no interest in diplomacy either. If they're not willing to negotiate, it's going to come down to who's willing to fight harder. Taraketh turned to face him, her eyes reflecting the weight of the situation. "We'll fight, Jake. The Vixar don't back down from a challenge. But I need to know, will the humans stand with us? Will you?" Jake met her gaze, his expression serious but steady. "I'm with you, Taraketh. Always. And the humans. We don't roll over when things get tough. We've been through hell before, and we've always come out the other side. Stronger." The enemy unveiled. As they spoke, an emergency broadcast lit up the room. The screen displayed the grim face of Admiral Rail, the human commander overseeing the joint Vixar-Human Defense Force. His voice was low and commanding, but there was an edge of urgency in his tone that made both Taraketh and Jake tense. "We have confirmed sightings of the enemy fleet on the outer rim of the Garak system," Admiral Rail said, his expression unreadable. "Our scouts report that the enemy vessels are far more advanced than we anticipated. They've taken out 2 of our outposts without warning, and our efforts to establish communication have failed. Prepare for full-scale engagement. All military personnel are to report to their assigned stations immediately." The broadcast ended, and the observation deck fell into a heavy silence. Taraketh's heart raced. This was it. The war they had been preparing for was no longer a distant threat. It was here now, and there was no time left for hesitation. Jake sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Guess it's time to see what we're made of." Taraketh turned to him, her determination flaring to life. "We have to act fast. We can't let them get any closer to our worlds. If they breach the outer defenses, they'll strike at the heart of our alliance." Jake nodded, already pulling up tactical schematics on his holo tablet. "Let's get to the command center. I've got some ideas for defense strategies. If we can funnel their ships into narrow corridors, we might be able to slow them down." Taraketh admired the way Jake's mind worked in moments like this. He was a soldier at heart, but his real strength lay in his ability to adapt and strategize. It was what had drawn her to him in the first place, the way he could take an impossible situation and find a way to turn it in their favor. But this time, the stakes were higher than ever. Rallying the troops. The command center was a hive of activity. Tactical officers from both human and Vixar forces crowded around holographic maps, plotting defensive positions and analyzing enemy movements. The air was thick with the hum of communication devices and the low murmur of urgent conversations. As Taraketh and Jake entered, all eyes turned toward them. Taraketh could feel the weight of their expectations pressing down on her. She had proven herself in the arena, but this was different. This wasn't a trial of strength, this was war, and the people around her were looking to her for leadership. Commander Taraketh, a Vixar officer addressed her, bowing slightly. We've received confirmation from the outer defense grid. The enemy fleet will be within range in less than an hour. Taraketh nodded, her mind racing as she processed the information. What's our status? Are our ships in position? Most of them, yes, the officer replied, but we're still waiting on reinforcements from the Alarian system. They won't arrive in time. Jake stepped forward, his voice steady and confident. We'll have to make do with what we've got. Let's focus on the choke points. If we can force them into close combat, we might be able to limit their technological advantage. Taraketh glanced at the holographic map, her eyes narrowing as she studied the enemy's formation. The invaders had spread their forces thin, likely hoping to overwhelm the outer defenses with sheer numbers. It was a bold strategy, but it also left them vulnerable in certain areas. If we concentrate our firepower here, she said, pointing to a narrow asteroid field, we can funnel their ships into a bottleneck. Their larger vessels won't be able to maneuver as easily, and we can pick them off one by one. The officers around them nodded in agreement, quickly adjusting their plans to incorporate Taraketh's strategy. She could see the flicker of hope in their eyes. They weren't just fighting for survival, they were fighting for each other, for the alliance that had brought their two races together. A final farewell. As the preparations continued, Taraketh and Jake found a moment of quiet near the edge of the command center. They both knew what was coming. This battle would decide the fate of their alliance and possibly the future of their worlds. Taraketh looked at Jake, her heart heavy with the knowledge that this could be the last time they stood together like this. She had always prided herself on her strength, on her ability to face any challenge head-on. But the thought of losing Jake, of never seeing him again, was almost too much to bear. I never thought I'd find myself here, she said softly, her voice barely audible over the hum of the command center. Fighting for not just my people, but for yours too. Jake smiled, though there was a sadness in his eyes. You've come a long way, Taraketh. We both have. She took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. Whatever happens, I want you to know, I'm glad we fought together. Jake reached out, gently placing his hand on her shoulder. We're not done yet. We've still got a fight ahead of us, and I'm not going anywhere. Taraketh nodded, her resolve hardening. They had come too far to back down now. Together, they would face whatever came next, and they would do it side by side. The battle begins. The alarm blared across Starpoint Station as the enemy fleet appeared on the horizon, their sleek, black ships cutting through space like predators, closing in on their prey. The defenders scrambled to their positions, the air thick with tension and the promise of violence. Taraketh and Jake stood side by side in the command center, watching as the first wave of enemy ships entered the range of their defense grid. The battle was about to begin, and there was no turning back. As the ships collided in the vacuum of space, the first shots were fired, lighting up the darkness with explosions and fire. Taraketh's heart raced, but she remained calm, her focus sharp as she directed her forces. This was war, and there was no room for hesitation.